I still remember the cold, damp nights, curled up in the corner of our tiny crumbling house. The walls were thin, barely holding back the winter wind, and the silence inside was even colder. My mother, when she was around, spent most nights lost in a haze of alcohol and regret. My father? He was just a shadow of a memory, a name I barely recalled from whispers and old photographs buried in dust. Love was something I only saw in movies, something that belonged to other people, not me. My world was hunger, empty plates, and the distant echo of my mother's sobs when she thought no one was listening. School was no better. The other kids had their families waiting for them at the gate, their fathers ruffling their hair, their mothers scolding them for dirty shoes. Me? I walked home alone, dragging my feet, dreading whatever storm waited inside. By the time I was 12, I had learned the hard way that no one was coming to save me. No one cared whether I ate, slept, or even existed. And when you grow up believing you're invisible, you start to act like it. The streets became my refuge. The wrong people became my family. I still remember the first time I stole something, just a piece of bread from a vendor's cart. My stomach had been empty for 2 days, and the burning hunger had stripped away my fear. The moment my fingers closed around it, time seemed to freeze. My heart pounded, my breath hitched, and for the first time, I felt something: power. I ran as fast as I could, shoving the stolen bread into my mouth, my hands shaking with adrenaline. No one had ever given me anything before. Now, I took what I needed. That was the beginning. By 16, I had tried it all: drugs, gambling, fights that left my knuckles raw and bloody. Each night blurred into the next, each high an escape from the crushing weight of reality. I told myself I was in control, that I was choosing this life. But deep down, in the hollow part of my soul, I knew I was just a lost boy chasing shadows, waiting for something, someone, to pull me out before it was too late. But no one came. The city lights blurred into streaks as I sped down the empty highway, the engine growling beneath me like a caged beast. The night was thick with the scent of gasoline and regret. I had everything, or at least, that's what I told myself. The money, the parties, the women, the thrill of chasing something I couldn't name. But no matter how fast I drove, how much I drank, or how deep I sank into the neon-lit abyss of nightlife, the hollow space inside me only grew darker. At 22, I had my first real taste of success. Fast money, fast cars, fast living. I was the guy everyone wanted to be around, the one who always had a drink in his hand, a smirk on his face, and a reckless plan that somehow always worked. But the thing about living on the edge, you never see the fall coming. It started with a bad investment, a deal too good to be true. I ignored the warning signs, let my greed do the thinking. One signature, one handshake, and just like that, half of everything I owned was gone. The ones who cheered for me, who toasted to my success, they disappeared overnight. The brothers who swore loyalty when the champagne flowed were nowhere to be found when the debt collectors came knocking. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Instead, I doubled down. The gambling, the shady business deals, the endless cycle of trying to win back what I had lost, it consumed me. And with every loss, the weight in my chest grew heavier. Then came the betrayal. The one person I had trusted, the one I thought would stand by me, ripped away what little I had left. I found myself in an empty apartment, staring at eviction notices, drowning in bottles, the walls closing in. The silence was deafening. One night, I sat alone in a darkened bar, my reflection barely recognizable in the whiskey glass. My hands trembled, my mind raced. I had spent years chasing things that never loved me back. And now I was nothing. Just another lost soul in a city that chewed people up and spit them out. And the worst part? I had no idea how to stop. The rain pounded against the windshield, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon and shadow. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, knuckles white from gripping too hard. The world outside was alive, cars rushing past, people laughing under glowing street lamps. But inside this car, inside my mind, there was only silence. A deep, crushing silence. I had lost everything. The money, the so-called friends, the last fragments of trust I had in people. My business had collapsed overnight, debts swallowing me whole. The one person I had believed would stay had walked away without looking back. And now, the weight of it all pressed down on my chest like an iron vice, squeezing out every last ounce of hope. I pulled into an empty parking lot, the engine still humming, a bottle of whiskey rolling across the passenger seat. The air was thick with the scent of alcohol and regret. My fingers fumbled as I reached into the glove compartment, my breath ragged. Cold metal met my fingertips, a single bullet. One was all it would take. I exhaled, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, a man I didn't recognize. If God was real, where was he now? Where was he when I lost everything? When I begged for just one break, one sign that things would be okay? Tears burned down my face, mixing with the rain that dripped from my hair. I clenched my fists, slamming them against the dashboard. Why, God? Why did you let this happen? My voice cracked, raw, desperate. But the heavens didn't answer. There was no miracle, no sudden revelation. Just the sound of my own breathing, shaky and uneven, filling the suffocating space around me. Then, out of nowhere, a knock, a faint tapping on the driver's side window. I flinched, heart pounding. An old man, wrapped in a tattered coat, stood in the downpour, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Compassion. I rolled down the window, my voice barely a whisper. What do you want? He smiled, gentle yet knowing. Son, it's not too late. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. A flicker of something I thought had died long ago. The church was nearly empty when I stepped inside. The heavy wooden doors creaked as they closed behind me, sealing out the noise of the city, the honking horns, the shuffling feet, the distant echoes of a world that had left me behind. I wasn't sure why I had come. Maybe it was the old man's words still echoing in my mind. Son, it's not too late. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of carrying the weight of my failures for too long. Or maybe, just maybe, I had finally run out of places to hide. I sank into a pew at the back, my hands trembling as I buried my face in them. The air smelled of old wood and burning candles, and somewhere in the distance, soft organ music hummed like a whisper. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. For years, I had scoffed at people like this, those who clung to faith as if it could save them. But now I was the one grasping at something, anything, before I slipped too far. My eyes wandered to the front of the church where a simple cross hung above the altar. It was nothing grand, nothing elaborate, just two pieces of wood intersecting. And yet, as I stared at it, something inside me cracked. I clenched my fists, my voice a broken whisper. If you're real, if you're really there, then why? Why did you let me go through all of this? Silence. I waited for something. Thunder, a voice from the heavens. A sign that I hadn't just wasted my last bit of hope on a God who had forgotten me. But there was nothing. Just the flickering candlelight, the distant hum of the organ, and my own shattered breath. And then, something changed. A warmth, subtle at first, like the gentle touch of sunlight breaking through storm clouds, began to spread through my chest. My heartbeat slowed, my hands steadied. The crushing weight that had been pressing down on me for years began to lift, replaced by something I couldn't explain. Peace. Not the fleeting kind that came from a drink or a distraction. Not the numbness I had chased for so long. This was different. This was real. Tears blurred my vision, but for the first time in years, they weren't from pain. I exhaled, my shoulders shaking, and in that moment, I knew. I wasn't alone. I had never been. The first few months were brutal. Walking away from my past wasn't as simple as a single prayer in a dimly lit church. It was a battle, one I had to fight every single day. The world I had built for myself, the habits I had formed, the people I once called friends, they didn't just disappear overnight. I had no job, no savings, and no real direction. The weight of my past clung to me like a shadow, whispering that I would never change, that I would always be the man who lost everything. Some nights, the temptation to drown it all in a bottle was almost unbearable. But every time the darkness crept in, I held on to one thing, the peace I had felt that night in the church, the warmth that had spread through me when I had finally let go. Not everyone understood. You really think this is gonna fix everything? My old friend scoffed, slamming his beer onto the table. God's not gonna pay your bills, man. My family was even more skeptical. My mother, who had seen me fall too many times, just shook her head. We've heard this before, she whispered. How long until you give up again? I didn't have an answer for them. All I had was faith, and for the first time in my life, it was enough. I started small, waking up early, reading scripture instead of drowning in regret. Taking a job, nothing glamorous, just stocking shelves in a grocery store, but it was honest work. The first paycheck was barely enough to cover rent, but when I held it in my hands, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride. Little by little, things changed. The anger that had once controlled me began to fade. The restless nights became fewer. I still carried my past, but it no longer defined me. Then one day, an opportunity came. A man at church, someone who had been watching my journey, offered me a position at his company. "I see something in you," he said. A man willing to rebuild. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was rebuilding my soul. And for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't a lost cause. I was a man becoming something new. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the community center, casting golden streaks of light onto the worn wooden floors. The hum of quiet conversations filled the air. Voices of the lost, the broken, the ones searching for the same hope I had once desperately needed. I stood at the front of the room, hands resting on the old wooden podium. A year ago, this building had been abandoned, its walls covered in graffiti, its floors littered with shattered glass. But now, it was a sanctuary, a place where men and women, just like me, could find refuge. Taking a slow breath, I looked out at the faces before me. Some were hardened, skeptical, eyes filled with the same doubt I had carried for so long. Others were weary, drained from the weight of battles they had yet to win. And then there were those who had begun to believe, their eyes carrying the flicker of something I knew well: hope. "I was once where you are," I began, my voice steady but filled with the weight of memory. I chased success, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside me. I built a life on things that never loved me back, and when it all fell apart, I thought I had nothing left. Silence filled the room. They were listening. But I was wrong, I continued, because when I lost everything, I found the one thing I had been missing all along: God's purpose for my life. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some leaned forward. Others cast their eyes down, wrestling with their own struggles. "I am not here today because I became rich," I said, shaking my head. "I am here because I stopped running, because I realized that real success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by how we live out the purpose He has given us." At the back of the room, a young man, no older than I was when I hit rock bottom, wiped his eyes, his hands trembling. I recognized that look. I had seen it in my own reflection years ago. I stepped down from the podium, walking toward him. "You're not alone," I told him softly. And in that moment, I knew this was what I was meant to do. As I look back on my life, I see it not as a series of mistakes and misfortunes, but as a journey carefully guided by the hands of God. Every failure, every heartbreak, every dark night of the soul was leading me somewhere, to a place of purpose, of peace, of understanding. Had I not fallen, I would have never known the power of getting back up. Had I not been lost, I would have never understood the miracle of being found. The years of wandering, of chasing things that never fulfilled me, were not wasted. They were lessons, shaping me into the man I am today. Now I no longer live for myself. My success is no longer measured by what I have, but by what I give, by the lives I touch, the hope I share, the people I lift up. If my story can save just one soul from walking the path I once did, then every hardship was worth it. And to you, reading this, I say, you are not alone. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how far you think you have fallen, God has a plan for you. Even if you cannot see it now, even if the road ahead seems uncertain, He is working in your life. If He could change me, someone who had lost everything, then He can change you too. You are loved, you are seen, and you are meant for something greater. Open your heart, take that first step, and watch how His grace transforms your life.